Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Tallman, an associate editor with South Florida Poetry Journal, and I have the amazing honor of being here with Maggie Smith, the author of You Could Make This Place Beautiful, a memoir. And Maggie will be joining us for the book fair this year. I encourage you to come see her. She'll be on Saturday, November the 18th at 10 a.m. With Danny Shapiro, and also the same day, Saturday at 2 p.m. with Hannah Petard. So encourage you all to come out to the book fair and support everything great we have going on there. Maggie, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Oh, no, thank you.
It's great to have you at Book Fair. I'm curious, have you attended before?
I have not. This is my first year.
Oh, wow, excellent. Have you ever been to Miami?
No.
Oh my goodness. Well, we have something in common. I'm actually from Michigan, so we have a Midwest connection. I think
Yes.
you're going to enjoy Miami. It's spicy. I think you'll have a lot of fun here. So I'm glad that we'll be able to welcome you. I'd like if you could start, just tell us a little bit about your book. You could make this place beautiful, and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of one of those books that it's being marketed, I think, a little bit as a divorce memoir, but that's not how I think about it at all. And so that's really what inspired it. That's the inciting incident of the book, was my marriage ending and having a sort of midlife opportunity, forced opportunity, really, to reevaluate some things and think, okay, who am I and what is my purpose here and what next, through all of that time. But to me, the book is really about personhood and art making and finding yourself. And it's sort of a coming of age story, if one can come of age and they're early to mid 40s, which I think we can.
Absolutely. Well, you've come quite a long way since, gosh, 2005. Lamp of the Body, I think, is the first book of yours that I read. And I've been following you for quite some time. So it's like we're almost 20 years later, and look at you, a best-selling New York Times best-selling author. That's pretty cool for a poet, I have to say, to be able to get on the bestsellers list, right?
It's astonishing. I mean, my first three books were poems, and I really thought probably my whole life that's what I would write and publish. And I think I always will. I mean, I'm a poet at my core. I hope the poems keep showing up. I'm so pleased whenever they do. I'm so grateful. But it's been really exciting to also branch out and experiment and sort of get out of my lane and find new containers for new ideas.
That's a really great segue, because I'm curious, as mostly a poet myself, how did you approach writing this memoir versus writing your poetry books? Was there a different process?
You would think there would be, but not that different. I wrote each of the vignettes in that book, on their own, just like I do with poems. Poems arrive as they will. And the same thing with the storytelling in this book. And then even the assembly of it was a lot like assembling a collection of poems. I kind of color coded some different thematic and sort of formal strands and then shuffled the pages together in a way to get that movement the way that I do when I assemble a poetry collection. So I think, even though it's prose, it's definitely a poet's memoir.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. I really enjoy reading it so much. And I'll tell you, you kind of inspired me, because you start out by saying you weren't sure where to start. And that I think you said it's kind of always in the middle, right? So I think that's inspiring for other poets who are listening and might be overwhelmed with the length of what it takes to flesh out a memoir.
Oh my gosh, I completely understand that. I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, this book has to be this many words," because as a poet, we don't think in terms of word count. If I'm going to write a sonnet, it's 14 lines long. It's I'm not thinking about the word count. And so when I thought about the length of this book, I thought, how many sonnets is that exactly?
Exactly.
So I knew I would be almost sort of writing a sonnet after a sonnet after a sonnet after a sonnet, and trying to kind of use all of my poetic superpowers in a book of prose. And I have to say, most of my favorite books of prose are, in fact, by poets. And I think there's this thing where there's the attention to the sentence, the attention to metaphor and image, and maybe just because you're coming from a different genre, some of the quote unquote rules of that genre have not been sort of hammered into you, perhaps in the way that they would have been had you grown up studying the novel or studying nonfiction writing. And so I took a lot of risks in this book, and some of them I think I took precisely because I'm primarily a poet, and I thought I can probably get away with this because I'm doing something slightly different.
I think this would be a really good point in the conversation, if you're open to it, to reading maybe an excerpt. And I don't know if you'd be open to it or not, but
Sure.
I have a part I really love. And I have this bad habit of starting at the end of books and then going back to the beginning. I really love this. It's pages 308 and 309. It's Call Myself Darling. And I love the poem Bride. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to read that.
Sure. Do both pages?
If you're comfortable, it'd be amazing
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
do
of
that.
course. Of course. So this is the spoiler alert. This is the end of the book, but I'll also little behind the scenes. This was not the original ending of the book. The original ending of the book is the chapter that comes actually just comes a page back. And the chapter is called How It Ends. And so the original ending of this book was every ending is secret until it happens. And
Oh,
I
wow.
know. So we flipped some things around. And actually my editor suggested this, and I actually really like it because I think this ending has more agency and a little bit of a lift at the end that really open ending doesn't have. So yeah, this is Calling Myself Darling. When my poem Bride was first published, I was in Florida teaching a week-long workshop at a poetry festival. Each day, between morning classes and afternoon lectures and panel discussions, I managed to carve out enough free time to walk a little over a mile from my hotel to the beach. As an Ohioan, I couldn't be that close to the Atlantic and not gape at it as often as possible. On that day, I stopped at the news shop, picked up 2 copies of the New Yorker, and carried them down to the beach in my tote bag. I sat down on a bench, pulled off my boots and socks, then walked barefoot across the sand to the slap and fizz of the waves breaking. Something about being at the ocean always reminds me of how small I am, but not in a way that makes me feel insignificant. It's a smallness that makes me feel a part of the world, not separate from it. I sat down in a lounge chair and opened the magazine to my poem, the thin pages flapping in the wind. In that moment, I felt like I was where I was meant to be, doing what I was supposed to be doing. Life, like a poem, is a series of choices. Something had shifted, maybe just slightly, but perceptibly. I remember feeling the smile on my face the whole walk back to the hotel, hoping it didn't seem odd to the people around me. I stopped at the drawbridge that lifted so the boats could go under. The whole street lifted up right in front of me. Nothing seemed impossible anymore. Everything was possible. And then this is the poem, Bride. How long have I been wed to myself, calling myself darling, dressing for my own pleasure, each morning choosing perfume to turn me on? How long have I been alone in this house, but not alone? Married less to the man than to the woman, silvering with the mirror. I know the kind of wife I need, and I become her, the one who will leave this earth at the same instant I do. I am my own bride, lifting the veil to see my face. Darling, I say, I have waited for you all my life.
Thank you so much. Gosh, I love that poem. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank
And
you.
now, everyone who's listening, you're going to have to go and buy the book if you haven't already, because you're going to have to read how Maggie got to that end of her journey. Her journey. Okay, very important. So I'm wondering if you could share some tips for writing through grief specifically, because I know it can
Mm.
be an extra challenge. So, how did you approach writing through this grief that you were feeling at the end of your marriage?
It was hard to write this book, but living it was harder than writing about it. And I think there is actually something, and I'm not going to call it therapeutic because writing this book was certainly not therapeutic for me. But it was in some ways useful and healing in ways that I did not expect. And I think it comes down to the difference between having a bunch of feelings and emotions and questions kind of swirling in some sort of amorphous way inside you, and then confronting those experiences and writing about them in a way that gives them form. And giving something form and taking it outside of your body and putting it on the page, I found that incredibly useful. And so for me, and people ask me this all the time. I've sort of become a divorce whisperer in particular. People will reach out to me in emails and DMs or pull me aside at events and just say, I'm going through this thing. And maybe it's a divorce, or maybe it's, I lost my parents, or I lost a child, or I've been diagnosed with this thing and I don't know what's going to happen next, or whatever the big upheaval is. I don't know why people think I have the secret to how to work through this. I don't know that I have secrets, but people ask, and often what I'm suggesting is start small, start concrete, and tell your stories. Because I think it's probably a mistake to sit down and write a book that you think will be about resilience, right?
Mm,
Or to write your story in a way that you're trying to write toward themes or
mhm,
toward some reader takeaway that you imagine them having. I think it's probably even a mistake to write your story knowing how it ends.
mm,
And I don't mean your life, because obviously, if you're writing a memoir, it's about a specific range of time. And so
mhm,
when the book ends, the life continues. I just mean even that very book. It's probably best to enter writing about anything difficult without having some sort of end product in
mm,
mind and letting it happen organically. And so when I sat down to write the memoir, I thought, what stories do I want to tell? What memories feel important, formative? Like, what are the load-bearing moments that I feel like if I only were to tell 10 stories, for example, in this book, what are the 10 stories that kind of assembled would gesture toward the whole? And so I think maybe starting there and starting small, whether you're a poet or not, is helpful.
yeah, I think that's really good advice. As I was reading your book, it did remind me a little bit of Frank's sonnets. I don't know if anyone else has told you that before.
No, but I love that book so much, so I take that as such a compliment.
Yeah, I
Diane
mean,
Seuss is a genius.
it is, and I mean, obviously, your book's not in sonnet form, but the vignettes and the thematic, and because you're a poet, the vignettes, they're lyrical, they're poetry, they're not just like a typical chapter in a book. It's just beautiful what you've done. I'm also curious, if you could talk a little bit about identity and
Mm.
navigating your identity through this loss that you've processed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we don't talk enough about, with these kind of large life upheavals, whether it's, losing your spouse or getting divorced, or even just changing careers, frankly. I mean, so many of us, particularly in the last, say, 3 years, for example, like our lives don't look the same necessarily as they did even pre-pandemic. And I think one of the things we don't talk enough about is the identity hit that we take when we lose something that seems essential to us. A spouse, even empty nesters. Oh my gosh, like you've been raising kids and suddenly they're not in the house, and what do you do? Or I always thought of myself as a teacher and now I'm retired. So what am I if I'm not doing that? Or for those of us who are having, issues with writer's block, or I think I'm a writer, but I haven't written in a while. So what does that mean to my identity? And it's been really important to me personally to sort of like divest myself from a lot of those trappings. And, therapy is really good for that, but and so is spending time with friends and spending time in nature, but just taking time to realize that you have inherent worth and
Mm.
subjectivity apart from what you do for a living, who you're in a relationship with, who you take care of on a daily basis. Like aside from all those other attachments, you're a human being. And that sort of focus has been really important to me. And yet the deep irony of that is I feel most like myself when I'm writing. So a way to really connect with myself on that core identity level is to do my job.
Well, I can see why people come to you a lot because I feel like I'm kind of having a therapy session right now as I'm talking to you. You have a very calm energy.
I'm not
So
going to invoice you, Nicole. It's fine.
thank you. I noticed a lot of water in this book, and I'm curious if that was intentional.
No, and I love that because no one else has said that yet, and now I'm going to have to go back and sort of make my way through it. I mean, sure, there's the sort of guiding metaphor of the boat, right? And then
Hmm.
the sort of adjacent metaphor of the shark under the boat, and sort of what it means to get your sea legs after a big change. So I think that's absolutely there. But this reminds me of giving a reading from Good Bones years ago when that book came out and someone raised their hand and said, "What's with all the birds?" Right? And of course I laughed because I thought, well, like I knew some of that was there, but I don't think I really understood how high the dial was turned up on the birds. And one of the beauties of like sending our kicking our work out of the nest, we're going to use a bird metaphor here, and letting it leave is that other people see things in your work that you don't. And sometimes I feel like I'm the least capable authority on my own work because so much of it is coming from this sort of deep well of like an intuitive, almost unconscious kind of place. And then when readers encounter the work, they see patterns and things that I'm like, oh, I must have somewhere meant to do that. And yet I feel like I can't claim sort of responsibility for it in a way.
That makes sense. Oh, and readers may also see what they want to see as well. I have a degree in French, and I did a paper on the role of water in Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. So maybe I
You
keep
trained
looking
your
for the water.
eye.
Yeah, I don't know. That might be why I picked up on the water, but I was just curious if it was intentional or not.
I love that.
So I'd like to know either what you're reading or listening to music wise right now. Is there anything
Oh,
particular that you want to recommend to people who are listening?
yeah. So reading wise, I just finished Lauren Groff's new novel, The Vaster Wilds. And I'm going to admit something. It's the first book of hers that I've read. And I feel like such a
Oh,
late comer. I'll admit something else. I don't read a lot of novels. I read
mhm.
primarily nonfiction and poetry. And so I don't remember, someone wrote something about that book that described it as such a strange journey and so formally inventive and so unlike any other novel they'd ever read that I was immediately smitten and I pre-ordered the book. And I can't say enough good things about it. The Vaster Wilds. I am obsessed. I finished it on a plane, and then on the flight home, I started it again. That's how much I love
Hmm.
this book. Music wise, I'm going to also admit something. We put up our Christmas tree and decorations the day after Halloween. And so we are listening to a lot of like classic Christmas songs, Vince Guaraldi and Johnny Mathis and Bing Crosby in our house right now as a way to kind of manufacture some joy because the world feels like a very harrowing place at the moment. And so we're attempting with lights, tinsel, and crooners to pretend it is otherwise. That's what's happening here.
I love that. So you don't have any Halloween, I'm sorry, any Thanksgiving decorations.
We
You went
don't
straight to
do
Christmas. No,
no, I'm like, I mean, I'm a vegetarian. There's no reason for me to put like a tom turkey up in my house.
that makes okay, that's fair. Well, it sounds like you've created a really festive environment. So now you've inspired me to maybe put away the Halloween decorations I haven't gotten around to putting away yet. I'm going to do that
I mean,
when
it's early. We have definitely sort of jumped the gun on this here at our house. Like everyone else still has Halloween stuff up in the neighborhood, and you walk into our house and there's a pine scented candle lit, and it looks like a Macy's parade thing. It's not normal, but this is what we do.
Well, I don't think you're too out of tune because I just ordered new Nespresso capsules and they have their holiday flavors out now. So the spice just arrived. So I
Okay,
think you're
so
you're at schedule. Yeah, I need to
I'm
get
right
with
in
it.
time.
So I know you have a lot going on. So I just want to ask you before we end our conversation, is there anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to discuss or anything you want to plug, anything you're working on next, maybe?
Goodness, that's such a kind question. I don't think so. I mean, the one thing that I have coming up, and for a long time, it seems like a very long time away because that's the way book publishing works. You know what's happening, and there's a very long runway. And it just dawned on me that in like 3 months, I have another book coming out.
Oh, wow.
So in February, I have a picture book, an illustrated picture book for children coming out with Balzer and Bray, which is an imprint at HarperCollins, and it's called My Thoughts Have Wings. And it's beautiful because I didn't illustrate it. A wonderful artist named Leanne Hatch illustrated it and worked such incredible alchemy with the artwork that I honestly I can't wait to share it with folks. So that's coming in February.
How wonderful. Well, congratulations. You
Oh,
are just a
thanks.
master of all genres here. It's pretty impressive.
I'm having fun. It's been fun again, like to find different containers for different ideas. Like that book wasn't going to be a poem, so it had to be something else. And this memoir, I couldn't have achieved what I did in this book in a collection of poems. That's just not the way that I could do the storytelling. So I think when I get an idea, the first thing I'm thinking of is what is the form for this content. And I'm always happy when it agrees to be poetry because that's where I feel most comfortable working. But some things just want to be something else.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to me. I know how busy you are. And I want to encourage everyone to come to Book Fair on Saturday, the 18th at 10 and 2 to see Maggie. You can get her to sign a copy of her memoir. And I think they'll have her other books there too. So if you have poetry books like me, I still have Goldenrod waiting to be signed. So I might bring
Oh,
that down too.
yes.
Absolutely.
I'm
I'm gonna
bringing my
bring all my
pens.
books.
It's on. Bring me your stack. I'm on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for your time. And everyone, please come to Book Fair and support local books. Again, I'm Nicole Tallman, and this is Maggie Smith, and we look forward to seeing you at Book Fair. Thanks again, everybody.